Hello everybody, this is TipTop MTG here today with another custom Magic the Gathering video. In today's video, I am continuing a series I call Magic the Marveling, where I take every Marvel Cinematic Universe movie and Disney Plus TV show and turn them into custom Magic the Gathering sets of cards. So as you know, WandaVision finished up just a couple weeks ago, and in that time I have created the biggest addition to Magic the Marveling ever, featuring 98 new cards, featuring characters, events, and items from the show. Now, before I say anything else, I want to say, if you have not watched the series, I really recommend you do that before watching this video for a couple reasons. First off, some of the design choices I made are specifically because of how things happen in the series, and so if you haven't watched it, that may be confusing. Second, the show really depends on kind of the mystery aspect for a lot of its appeal, and so if you have something spoiled, it's not going to be a lot of fun, and so I really recommend you watch it first. So again, spoiler warning, there will be WandaVision spoilers throughout this entire video, so from this point on, I may say things about what happens, the finale, any of that. So yeah. If you guys have not seen any of my other videos in this series, essentially, again, I take characters, items, and events from these movies. This is the first TV show, actually, and I turn them into Magic the Gathering cards. So all the characters are legendary creatures, events get turned into instant sorceries, enchantments, artifacts, and then what I do is I take some of the more important characters and events from the show or movie, and I talk about them in the video, but I'm not going to be talking about 98 cards right here. So what I've done is in the description, you can find a link to the Magic the Marveling website where you can look at every single card. This is really a community project, so if you have any suggestions for cards or changes, or if you notice something's worded wrong, please let me know. This is a constantly changing project. So leave those in the comments down below, or go over to my Discord. Again, link in the comments down below, or description down below. Either way, I've been rambling for 2 minutes. This is probably going to be a long video anyway, so let's jump right into this. Now, normally I would start by talking about the main character, but we're actually going to be talking about a random common, which is Persistent Stork, which, obviously happened in one of the episodes, but the reason this is here is to showcase a brand new mechanic to Magic the Marveling, and that is broadcast. So obviously this is a reference to, this show being broadcasted, and it's a very simple ability. Essentially, you broadcast and then you pay the cost. It'll be mana most of the time, but if I ever return to this, I may add things like broadcast, discard a card, or something. What it lets you do is put a broadcast counter on this permanent, activate this ability only during your turn, and only as long as this creature doesn't have a broadcast counter on it. So essentially, it doesn't really do anything on its own other than put a broadcast counter on the creature, but normally the creature will care about it. So for instance, Persistent Stork, whenever it would leave the battlefield, if it had a broadcast counter on it, instead return it to its owner's hand. So the idea is if you can broadcast this, so if you can pay 3 mana for a 1/1, you can kind of keep bringing it to your hand. There are a couple interesting things you can do with broadcast, and I may end up changing the wording to activate this ability only anytime you can cast a sorcery, because right now technically you could pay 2 mana, pay 2 mana, pay 2 mana all at the same time and put like 3 counters on it, because it's not limiting when the counter goes on, it's limiting when the ability can be activated, and so that may end up getting a little bit of a change there, but we will have to see. I think right now I like the way it's going, so I just wanted to showcase this because on some of the more complex cards, I didn't have the reminder text there, so keep that in mind. Essentially, broadcast, you're paying the mana cost to put a broadcast counter on it, and you can only basically have one broadcast counter on there unless you activate them at the same time. Alright, so jumping into our first card, we have Wanda the Scarlet Witch. It's a 6-cost red legendary creature, enhanced human witch, 5/4. So in the past, Wanda has been primarily blue, going into like hexproof and magic and, mind meddling, but I'm kind of moving more into the chaos aspect of her here. She kind of has this chaos magic, and that's kind of been named in the show now, so I thought it made a lot of sense to kind of play into that, and magic already has its form of chaos, so I thought I would do something that kind of made sense both thematically, and it is chaos magic, and it's a chaos card, because that is kind of an archetype. But first, let's talk about the fact that she has the witch creature type. This is not a thing in Magic, but I thought it made a lot of sense because there is kind of a big focus on it, and I have a feeling going forward that it will be important. Now, the enhanced creature type, for those of you who haven't seen my other videos, has been here since Captain America: The First Avenger, and there are cards that care about enhanced creatures, and she's always had it, and while she was a witch by default, and we kind of learned that in the show that she's always been a witch, she does get enhanced, so I think the creature type still makes sense. Now, I am going back and forth on going back to her old cards and calling her a witch, because she has been this whole time, but as of now, I'm leaving all the other cards the way they were. If witch gets even more support, I may go back to add a little bit more there. Either way, you'll notice she does not have the hero type, which normally it would be legendary hero, enhanced human witch instead of legendary creature, which just means she's a creature with the hero type. It's just to save space on the type line, but you'll notice she's not that, because she's not the hero of the story necessarily, and she's also not really the villain either, and that's kind of an interesting dynamic there, and so I figured I would leave her as legendary creature. Either way, moving into the card, she has partner with Vision Grief Incarnate. The show is literally named WandaVision. They are paired together. She created him. I think it made a lot of sense that they have partner. It means they can be in the command zone together, and it also means that when you play her, you can go get Vision, which I think makes a lot of sense. You play her, you get Vision. Very, very cool. So then it says, whenever a creature you control with a broadcast counter on it attacks, so remember, broadcast counter with like Persistent Stork, you just pay the mana. Exile that creature. Exile cards from the top of your library until you reveal a creature with a less than or equal converted mana cost. That will be changed to mana value when that happens in Magic the Gathering, but for now it says converted mana cost. Put that card onto the battlefield under your control, attacking target opponent. If the creature entering the battlefield shared a type with the exiled creature, put a broadcast counter on it. Return the exiled creature and all other cards exiled this way to the bottom of your library in a random order. So that's a lot of text to basically say, whenever a creature with a broadcast counter on it, which includes Wanda, which maybe isn't the way it should work, but that's how it works right now, attacks, they exile themselves, and that's not an optional thing, that you have to do that. And then you go through the top of your library until you hit another creature that has equal or lesser converted mana cost, and you put that on the battlefield attacking. So you're kind of swapping the creature that's attacking, and the idea is, you're entering the hex, you're kind of becoming a new creature, and then if that creature that entered the battlefield shared a type with the one that got exiled, so let's say you exiled Wanda, and then you got another human or another witch or another enhanced, then it would enter with a broadcast counter on it. And if you didn't exile Wanda, say you exiled someone else, that means that the next turn, when they attack, they will switch. So it kind of randomizes your attack, and it's not necessarily an amazing thing, but there are probably a lot of combo-y things you can do with this, especially when you count the fact that she gives all creatures the ability, pay 1 and a white, tap this creature to broadcast. So, very, very powerful in the sense that she's allowing any creature to kind of do this changing effect, and it is powerful, but they do have to attack, and then your creature that you swap into has to not die in combat, which can be a little tricky. So it's very gimmicky here, but it definitely has some interesting applications, and it really plays into that chaos. It is chaos magic. It is chaos in magic. Chaos magic in the universe, chaos within magic, and it's representing people kind of entering the hex and changing. And so I thought this was a perfect way to do it. It also supports any of the creature types in the set. It also supports broadcast. So I just thought this was an amazing card, that design that allowed me to support so many different things with just one card. But then she partners with Vision, Grief Incarnate. He's the creation of her Grief. He's a 3 cost, so the idea is you can play him early, her later. Now, how partner works is that you share the color identity. So she had white and red. He has blue and green and red. So this is actually a 4-color commander, and that's just because I wanted to make sure that you could have a broadcast deck, which broadcast is within 4 colors. It's just not in black. So it's partnered with Wanda the Scarlet Witch. It has flying, and it says whenever a permanent you control broadcast, untap it. If at least 1 red was spent to broadcast it, it gains haste until end of turn. So the idea here is that you can kind of use your broadcast ability to untap. For instance, if you Wanda were to put a creature down on the battlefield, you could broadcast it at instant speed on your turn, and it would allow you to untap it. It would also allow you to maybe give things haste if you really want, and maybe get that Wanda ability to trigger when your opponents aren't expecting it. It also is just powerful because, there is a land in the set that has broadcast, and now when you're broadcasting it, you're untapping it, so maybe you can do some shenanigans with that. Kind of interesting. But remember, you can only broadcast something if it doesn't have a counter on it, so that is limited in its usage. But you can pay 4 and a green and remove a broadcast counter from a creature you control. If you do, draw a card. This ability costs 1 and a green less to activate if Vision has a broadcast counter on it. And then it has broadcast for 4 mana. So let's talk about this card design. It is kind of complicated and it does a lot of different things, but it's meant to be good in a broadcast deck and really good when you have Vision and Wanda down. And here's kind of what happens when you have Vision and Wanda down. Okay, so you can remove broadcast counters from creatures you control, which is so powerful with Wanda because Wanda makes you exile that creature. But if you can get rid of that broadcast counter, you can then keep that creature and it doesn't get exiled. And then you're also drawing cards. But also, Vision has kind of an expensive broadcast at 4 mana, but Wanda gives Vision the ability to broadcast for only 2 mana, which makes that second ability then cheaper. So generally, it is a pretty powerful card because if you have Wanda, who you are always going to get because you'll search your library for her, it's just overall really synergizing with broadcast. If you have both of them out, they both help each other, and I think it makes a lot of sense, and I really like the way it was done. Next, we have Vision Calculating Agent, the other Vision of this series. I actually gave him the Agent tag, which is, again, new to Magic the Marveling. It has some support. I think it started in Captain Marvel, and it just made sense. He is an Agent of Sword, at least at first, and Calculating Agent, he is very calculated in his attack. He's a 5-cost red legendary artifact creature, 5/5 with flying, so 5/5 with flying for 5, and whenever a broadcast counter is put on a creature, Vision fights that creature. That includes your creatures, so if you run this in a broadcast deck, you don't want to because it's not optional. And if your opponents have the ability to put broadcast counters on things, this can really quickly backfire. If your opponent has a card that says put a broadcast counter on target creature, it basically says they're going to ram one of this creature into one of your other creatures. And that's really dangerous. So it is a little risky there. But then you can pay 4 mana, tap, and discard a card to put a broadcast counter on target permanent. Probably putting it on your opponent's stuff. But yeah, it's kind of an interesting way to do removal, but it's a little risky, and it makes sense. He's going after the people within the broadcasting area, and he's kind of able to select his target and go for them. So I really like the design of this card. All right, next we have Monica Rambeau. She is a 3-cost blue and white legendary hero. I'm calling her the hero. She's clearly on the side of good in this human agent, 2/3, and it says Monica Rambeau gets +1/+1 for each broadcast counter on it. This is kind of representing the fact that she goes into the hex multiple times. You can tap, and the next time target creature broadcasts this turn, it broadcasts as though it had no broadcast counters on it. This is very reminiscent of Adapt and Biomancer's Familiar. She is the one who keeps going in and out of this hex. She's the one who's able to constantly rebroadcast, and so I thought this made a lot of sense. It is good within a broadcast deck. She is technically 3 colors because of that broadcast cost, and I think it makes a lot of sense. I really enjoy the way this card works because I think it is so lore heavy. And actually, I really enjoyed all of WandaVision. I think the broadcast ability is so much fun for me to play around with from a designer perspective, and it just allows for a lot of cool stuff to happen. Next, we have Darcy Lewis, Hex Scientist, 4-cost, red, legendary creature, human, scientist, 3/4. Again, scientist, a new thing. Whenever a creature broadcasts, create a discovery token. This is a new thing I'm introducing within the remastered sets, but I thought it made a lot of sense here. The whole thing is kind of like a big puzzle, so you'll notice a lot of investigate and clue tokens and discovery tokens, because, they are investigating, finding clues, and finding discoveries. So, discovery is a token that lets you pay 2 and sack it to scry 2. So it's a little bit worse than like a clue. But yeah, whenever a creature broadcasts, create a discovery token. So essentially, as more and more people are popping up, they're discovering more about this hex. And then as long as Darcy Lewis has a broadcast counter on it, whenever you sacrifice a clue token, create a discovery token. So while she doesn't create clue tokens herself, I kind of love the fact that when you sacrifice a clue, you discover something, so you make a discovery token. I think it's really awesome. It is kind of expensive to broadcast, but if someone else like Wanda maybe expands her hex and maybe gets that a little cheaper, that can do some very interesting things by reducing the cost there. And I just love the way this works. It kind of gives you some extra value for your clues, which you'll see there are some other cards that care about that. Speaking of which, Jimmy Woo, Hex Investigator, 2-cost, white, legendary, hero, human agent, 2/2, and whenever an agent or a creature with a broadcast counter on it attacks, investigate. So it's very simple, but essentially whenever something's happening either with, he investigates 2 things. He investigates the Hex and he investigates Sword and kind of what they're doing. And so whenever their agents are doing something, he's figuring stuff out, whenever a thing with a broadcast counter on it attacks, you also get to investigate, and this includes your opponent's stuff. So this is a really good card against like broadcast decks because you're just going to get so much value. And honestly, I could see an argument for raising the mana cost of this card, but I think it really climactically and lore wise fits. Next, we have Agatha, the main villain, I would say, or at least one of the main villains. The main villain in the Hex, 7 cost, blue legendary villain, human witch, 4/4. And whenever Agatha is targeted by a spell, if Agatha is untapped, counter it. That's a very dangerous thing. That's like hexproof, but you know, it actually lets the spell resolve, or not lets the spell resolve, it just counters it instead of not being targetable. And then it says put a number of +1/+1 counters on Agatha equal to the mana value of the countered spell. The is missing there. It will be fixed. Sorry about that. And this one also says mana value. I am like all over it with mana value converted mana cost. I'm going to be honest, that change kind of happened in the middle of designing these cards. So some cards say mana value, some say converted mana cost. They will be fixed. But just for this overview, I think it's fine. And then you can pay 4 and tap and discard a card. Target opponent reveals their hand. You choose a card from among them. If the chosen card is an instant, sorcery, or aura spell, you may have that player cast it without paying its mana cost. You may choose the targets of that spell as long as you only choose yourself and or permanents owned by you. So that's a really complicated way to say you pick an instant, sorcery, or aura from their hand and make them target it at you or a permanent you control. And why you would do this is like, say they have a boost spell or a spell that says target player takes an extra turn or whatever. You kind of make them give you that, but even such, you can take the best card from their hand and make them cast it at Agatha, and as long as Agatha's untapped, it's going to get countered, not only getting rid of it from their hand, but also putting +1/+1 counters on Agatha. So she is kind of manipulating your opponent into making her stronger. Again, this is like the most lore accurate set I've ever done. Agatha takes the spells targeted at her and absorbs their power to become stronger, and then is able to manipulate you into targeting her with your magic. I love it. It's so much fun. I think it works really well. Again, you're seeing Human Witch as the type there. I just love the way this card works. It's so accurate. In the past, I've had to stretch a couple things for cool designs, but I love the way this works. It's unique, and I think it's really fun. Maybe not for your opponent, but it's a fun card to play. Next, we have Sparky, Loyal Puppy. It's a 2-cost green legendary creature dog, 5/4, and it says you may activate, first off, you'll notice it's a 2-cost 5/4. So it says you may activate broadcast abilities of permanents you control anytime you could cast an instant. So not only is it a 5/4 for 2, but it also is a booster to all your broadcast. However, whenever Sparky becomes the target of a spell an opponent controls, sacrifice it if it doesn't have a broadcast counter on it. The idea here is that it is a cheap creature, but it's really easily able to be killed. Like a green boost spell will kill this. So it allows essentially you to play a cheap creature, and if your opponent has no way of interacting with it, it's pretty good. But it is kind of the idea of it's a cheap creature that is vulnerable, and then you can eventually pay to make it not vulnerable. But what's cool is because you can activate broadcast abilities anytime you could cast an instant, you can just save the 4 mana, and if someone targets Sparky with something, the way the ability is worded, it's not if Sparky doesn't have a broadcast counter on it, whenever it becomes a target, sacrifice it. It's basically anything that target it's going to trigger the ability, and the ability is going to check whether there's a counter on it. So someone could target it with like a boost spell or something, expecting it to die. You activate the broadcast ability at instant speed. It checks and says, hey, wait a second, this does have a broadcast counter on it. We're not going to sacrifice it. So it's a nice little boost. It's self-contained kind of coolness. This could go in a deck without broadcast being relevant at all, but it could also go in a deck and really boost up broadcast, allowing you to get these effects at instant speed. Next, we have Tommy Maximoff. It's a 1-cost red legendary creature enhanced human, 1/1. So you'll notice Billy is a blue 1/1 for 1, and it has haste. And it says as long as Tommy Maximoff has a broadcast counter on it, creatures you control have haste, and this creature can't be blocked except by creatures with haste. So the idea here is I wanted them to start off really cheap, but you could kind of pour a ton of mana into them in order to give them cool abilities. Or you put them in a deck with Wanda, and Wanda makes their abilities cheaper to activate, or makes it only cost 2 mana to activate. So I thought it worked really well with other things in the set, and it also filled some 1-drop slots, which I don't have a lot of. So then Billy has Flash, and it says as long as it has a counter on it, creatures you control have hexproof, and whenever this creature attacks, try 1. So very, very powerful here, but it does cost 8 mana, and that's a lot of mana to be kind of investing into this. So yeah, you'll notice he is actually rare, whereas Tommy over here is common, probably going to get bumped up to uncommon, but rarities really don't matter in this set. Next we have the Darkhold. It is a 6-cost black legendary artifact, and it says black instant and sorcery spells you cast cost 2 less to cast. It's teaching you how to cast these spells. It's going to be easier to cast. And then whenever a creature dies, draw a card and lose X life, where X is the amount of times this ability has triggered this turn rounded down. So, essentially, the first time you'll just draw a card. Second time you will draw 1 card, or you'll draw a card and lose a life. Third time, draw a card and lose a life. Fourth time, draw a card, lose 2 life. So this could really easily backfire and kill you if you get too many triggers off of this. But it is a very kind of expensive artifact, and you know, it is the Book of the Damned, as they say in the show. And so yeah, it's going to be very powerful knowledge, but the knowledge could end up killing you. And I thought that was a perfect way to represent it. Next, we have Norm, one of the citizens, so you'll notice he actually has the citizen creature type, which is one in Magic already. It's a 2-cost blue 2/2. Whenever a counter is removed from Norm, scry 1. If that counter was a broadcast counter, draw a card. So it's going to encourage you to remove counters, and then you can pay 1 and tap another untapped creature you control. So you're tapping him and another untapped creature, and you're removing a counter of any type from Norm, and then you can broadcast them for 3. So the idea is you can kind of pay 4 mana and tap him and tap another creature to draw a card. Not amazing, but it also then synergizes with anything else that cares about either counters being removed or counters being placed on. The idea is Norm twice gets kind of unbroadcasted and is able to do it again, so I wanted to represent that by letting him remove his counters. Next, we have Suburban Life. This one's not necessarily a creature, but I just wanted to give you an example of another theme throughout the set, which is creatures with no ability. So this is a 2-cost white enchantment. It says, when it enters the battlefield, draw a card. And then it says, creatures you control with no abilities except those granted by enchantments you control have hexproof. So yeah, there are a lot of cards that care about when, like, a creature with no abilities. And you might be thinking, what is the inspiration for that? Well, it's kind of generic cliches of just like, quote-unquote boring or vanilla people all throughout these shows. So she's kind of turning all these people into boring people. So there's a lot of cards that will remove abilities from permanents, or it says you control all permanents with no abilities, you know, stuff like that. And so the idea is essentially you're turning people into basic people, and so you're going to get boosted for having a lot of those. And so what's happening here is she's protecting, or she thinks she's protecting all these people that have no abilities by giving them no abilities, but really they want their abilities back. And that's kind of the inspiration for this card. Next, we have roll credits. I wanted to give an example of how, of 2 things. First off, Mystic, which was originally in Doctor Strange. It's just a type of instant and sorcery. It doesn't do anything on its own, but there are cards that care about when you cast them. They're supposed to represent magic done in the like show, and not events. Because like I could have an event called Run, and it represents when they ran, or I could have a spell called Mystical Choke or whatever, when she chokes everyone. One of those is representing a magic spell that she cast, and one is representing an event. So whenever it's something that a wizard or witch casts, it becomes a mystic, and she purposely rolls the credits here, so that's why it's a mystic. But it says each creature with a broadcast counter on it phases out. If each creature you control has a broadcast counter on it, you phase out. So it's very cool. First off, if you have no creatures, this just is 1 mana, you phase out, which means that, you know, you treat yourself like you don't exist, basically, until your next turn. So I thought this was really interesting, and it's a very powerful payoff, I guess I could say. It's protection for your powerful creatures, and it's really good because generally, you know, if you're investing so much mana into a permanent by broadcasting it, you don't want that to die, because then you're losing a lot of value that your opponents are not. They're kind of able to 2-for-1 you in a way, maybe not in card advantage, but in mana advantage, and this kind of lets you save some of that, and it's really cool. You might be able to combine this because it is so cheap with like a board wipe, maybe do some cool stuff with that. Next, we have what I'm doing called Episode Spotlight. So these will be only for TV shows. So you'll notice the Falcon and Winter Soldier will have this. So essentially, it is the name of each episode. And essentially, it's 3 to 4 phases, and each one represents something that happens in the show. So we're only going to talk about the series finale, which is actually a little bit special, but it's a 6-cost thing, and each one lets you search for different cards. So it lets you search for Secret Manipulation, Mystic Choke, Non-Legendary Creature with Broadcast Ability, and Wanda the Scarlet Witch. So it lets you kind of search for those, and it kind of just goes along the story. But some of them, like if you look at Now in Color, put a broadcast counter on target permanent, you create 2 copies of target creature except they're 1/1s with no abilities and not legendary, return any number of targets with broadcast counters on them to the top of their owner's library. So it's very interesting things where it's like, it's kind of following the events of the story, because sagas are stories and we're looking at little episodic things. So I thought it made a lot of sense to have the kind of to have the sagas represented. So you'll notice at the bottom it says WandaVision episode spotlight, where it normally just says WandaVision. And so these actually have a special spot on the website, just separated. They are technically part of the full set, but I think they were a cool idea. And it lets me kind of represent each episode in an interesting and unique way. Alright guys, that is it for this video. I know it was a very long one, but I was just so excited about all of these cards. They're really fun. I hope you guys enjoyed. I know it came a little bit later. I really wanted to get it out last week, but 98 cards plus setting up this video, plus like editing it and then uploading it is a lot of work. So if you guys enjoyed this video, please hit the like button. These take a ton of time to make, and I really hope you enjoyed it. You guys should also check out my other Magic the Marvelings, where I broke down every other movie. We are caught up at this point, and I will be doing them for Falcon and the Winter Soldier as soon as that series is over. It is only 6 episodes, so expect that one maybe a week earlier than you got WandaVision. But yeah, if you guys want to stay up to date with everything, you can also join my Discord and check out my community tab. Lots of things I'm shouting out. Either way, hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, like button, subscribe. See you in the next one.